I'm here with Professor Sidney Griffith from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He has spent a lifetime studying early Christian Arabic and Syriac responses to Islam, the responses that came about in the earliest centuries of Islam. Sidney, what started you on this path that has been your life's work?
Well, it's a long story, but I'm assuming you want the short version. I was studying Semitic languages in my university with the view to becoming a scholar of the Bible. But for comparative purposes, linguistic comparative purposes, it was we would study Aramaic and Syriac and Arabic. And in the course of those studies, I discovered that there was this vast amount of material written by Christians in Arabic that was little studied, and there was everything academically to do with this line of study, to discovering the manuscripts, to actually finding them, to transcribing them, to translating, and it seemed a lot more exciting and interesting to me than one more time around the book of Job. Now, that, of course, I should be ashamed to say, but you asked me what started me in this area of study, and that was it.
Sure. Yeah. And what are the most important things you think you've learned over the years?
I think the most important thing that I learned was that there was a time when Christians and Muslims were able knowledgeably to talk to one another about one another's religious views. That doesn't mean that they were deeply friendly with one another or happy to consider the possibility of, say, some of the truth claims of the other, but they certainly were well informed about one another, and that's something that I find very much lacking in our world today for I don't know what reason, since we give lip service to the idea of the importance of dialogue and interreligious conversation and things like that, but we still are wanting a little bit in our understanding of what Muslims actually believe and think, and it's the same on the Muslim side. So I think that was a valuable lesson to learn, because it makes me think, well, if it could be done in 10th century Baghdad, why mutatis mutandis, can't it be done other places where Muslims and Christians live together and speak the same language, basically? So anyway, I think that's perhaps one of the lessons that to me is a valuable one. Yeah.
That's the hopeful side. What have you found most sobering about what you've learned?
Well, what I have found most sobering is how often the conversation partners seem inevitably to be talking past one another, even in instances where they're well informed, perhaps for other reasons, having to do with the relative ranking in society, say, of Christians in a Muslim society or Muslims in a Christian society, that's so often even knowledgeable conversation partners end up speaking past one another. And then the other thing that I find so really sorrowful is how all this knowledge and acquaintance with one another seems unable to prevent violence, really serious violence between communities. It's a constant reminder of our sinfulness, I guess one would have to say in the end. Yeah. So.
And what would you say to someone thinking of starting out on this path of study and exploration and writing that you've been on?
Well, I would say that I would hope that they would look upon it as an important undertaking, something that actually yields important information, because sometimes people will think, well, what's the point of reading old arguments about religion? I mean, we should be looking at something else. But it's in these arguments, or in the texts that report these arguments, that we see how the communities, as the communities are represented in individual persons, are learning to define themselves vis-a-vis one another. And that's important to know because it may lie even more deeply in the subconscious, of a later period than we realize. And to be aware of these sorts of things is a very exciting area of inquiry. And again, it's an area where there's almost everything to be done. You brought up that you're going to be studying next week Ibn Taymiyyah, but there are very few studies of that major book that he wrote, The Right Answer, or Jawab as-Sahih. There are very few academic studies of that book, and it leads you to think that there are very few scholars that have actually read it, and that it would be very actually useful to modern conversations to study it, to know about it, to read it, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you want to find out more about the kind of issues we've been discussing, you can come to the CMCS website.